Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the final issue in the original WildCats miniseries with WildCats number 4. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in March of 1993, we can see here on the cover featured are Spartan, Warblade, and Zealot. And while there's nothing inherently bad about this cover, the artwork's really cool, everything's very well put together, the coloring is great. I find myself having the same complaint that I had with the Stormwatch cover of Stormwatch number 3 that I looked at last week, in that there's nothing really tying this cover into the events that are taking place within the issue. This could just as easily be a cover of literally any issue of WildCats, not specifically this issue of WildCats. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I do like it more when the cover kind of has a little bit of a preview of what the story inside the book is going to be. Brandon Choi, Jim Lee. Co-creators, story. Jim Lee, pencils. Scott Williams, inks. Joe Chiodo, colors. Mike Heisler, letterers. Deborah Marvin, editor. John Ty, I believe is how you say that. If not, I apologize. Rich Johnson, background ink assistants. Wendy Fouts, Joseph H. Mendoza, color assists. Digital Prime, color separator. I would like to point out before we start in on this book, there is a nice little kind of dedication on the inside cover of this book, talking about how Willis Portacio was supposed to be publishing Wetworks around this time. However, it was delayed because of Portacio's younger sister dying after a long bout with lupus. Her name was Gemma. And it was really nice of Jim Lee to write this out and kind of explain to people what was going on. Many people were kind of wondering exactly what the delay was. And, you know, I think Jim realized that with everything Willis had on his plate, that, you know, it wasn't top on his list of priorities, which is understandable given, you know, the tragedy he was dealing with. And he wanted to make sure to convey that to all the readers that, you know, this wasn't just another case of an image creator, you know, dropping the ball and, you know, taking too long to get something out. This was a man who was dealing with a real personal tragedy, and he needed time to get all of his affairs in order before he could even begin to worry about, you know, penciling a comic book. And I applaud Jim Lee for doing this and, you know, taking it upon himself to, you know, kind of quell the naysayers and be like, you know, this guy's dealing with a lot right now. Let's cut him some slack. You know, that was pretty cool of him. On the first page, we see Hellspawn believing that he has won the day. At the end of issue number 3, we saw he had defeated half of the WildCats team, and it also seemed as if the other half of the WildCats team, along with Youngblood, were kind of fighting amongst themselves. And, you know, at this point, Hellspawn's got the portal open, or the Stargate, as it's called in this. Of course, it has nothing to do with the movie or the TV show. And that the Demonites are going to invade, and there's nothing that anyone in the teams can do to stop it. Pike, however, has a slightly more pessimistic view of the situation and tells Hellspawn that he may want to, you know, keep his bearings about him, that they haven't won yet. However, Hellspawn believes that his victory is inevitable at this point and states that, you know, the few WildCats members that are not here are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, along with all of Youngblood. However, we find out that, you know, he's kind of jumped the gun on this, as the Coda assassin in his employ has stated for him to turn around because the chickens have come home to roost, as the newly unpossessed Dan Quayle is alongside of Youngblood and the other members of the WildCats team, who are here to stop Hellspawn from leading the Demonite invasion. Voodoo instantly tries to basically exorcise the Demonite that is possessing Hellspawn. However, it doesn't work at all, and this is because the Demonite possessing Hellspawn is not using a human host, and apparently her powers can only exorcise Demonites that are possessing human beings, which is a new development. Seeing that Hellspawn has no inclination to give up. The entirety of the team of Youngblood and the members of Wildcats open fire on Hellspawn. However, he puts a shield in front of him, repelling all of their attacks, and laughs as they don't seem to be able to harm him in any way. Hellspawn then explains that the technology in the room that they're in is harnessing the energy of the orb, which he is then able to use himself and fully wield the powers of, which apparently make him nigh invulnerable, despite the fact that we still don't know entirely what the orb is capable of. He then uses the power of the orb to launch his own attack, which they manage to dodge, but the ensuing explosion launches them all into the air, as things are starting to look like they may in fact be going in Hellspawn's favor. We then see an advertisement for ProGuard bags and boards from Wizard. I never actually had the chance to ever use any of these, or have I ever known anyone who's used any of these, but if you have, let me know how they were in the comments. I'd be interested to know if they were any good. After his attack, Hellspawn then takes a moment to basically scorn and belittle Pike for doubting him, and then states that there's nothing that can be done to foil their plans at this point, stating that even though Belial, the demonite who was possessing Dan Quayle, has been killed, he served his purpose, and that now the Stargate cannot be closed, and the demonite armada will soon be upon Earth, and they will in fact conquer the planet. Meanwhile, the rest of the Wildcats are trying to regroup as Grifter asks Void if there's anything that she can do to try and help, but she is still trying to recover herself and regenerate her powers. However, Marlowe has a backup plan as he activates something on his wristwatch, which then uses an override code to reanimate Spartan. Again, we've just found out in the last issue that Spartan is a synthetic being. Before that, it was just implied that he was a normal human, but in fact, he is a cyborg synth of some type. He has his remaining energy is all put towards reanimating him and using his scanners. His body rises up and he finds the means necessary to override the reactor of the power plant that they're in, as he uses his last bit of strength to reach forward and cut off one of the interchange channels, I guess, that will cause the reactor to overload itself and explode. And in his last moments of being, he is able to complete this mission, living up to his name Spartan, as he will find a way to achieve victory at any cost. After pulling the switch, there's an immediate explosion, which grabs the attention of Pike as he turns around, wondering what's going on. The Coda assassin also is very upset about what's happening, as she realizes that the override has been hit and that the reactor is trying to explode. Hellspawn runs to a control panel to try and prevent the power surge that's coming. However, it's too late, as we see another explosion knock the three of them back. Hellspawn, of course, is rather, unscathed for the most part, as he stands up and tries his best to figure out a way to keep the Stargate from collapsing so that the Demonite Armada can make its way to Earth. This is the point where Marlowe realizes that they have to stop Hellspawn, and this is their only opportunity, as he tells Warblade to take the fight to Hellspawn and keep him busy so that he can't prevent the Stargate from being closed. Of course, Warblade is happy to oblige, as he hates the Demonites more than anything, and he jumps into action, claws ready, in a really cool scene that I think could have been made better if there was a background behind it, but given that there's quite a few panels that are throughout this book that are missing backgrounds, I think they may have been a little bit pressed for time. I'm just saying. We then see an ad for Wildcats #0, which I have a couple of copies of, and we will be seeing a video on this, despite the fact that I am really angry about how Wildcats #0 was made available to the public, but we'll get into that when I make the video on that issue. We see that Warblade has no trouble getting the drop on Hellspawn, as he jumps forward and slashes him across the chest, knocking him backwards. He then states that he's about to rip Hellspawn's heart out. However, Warblade was a little overconfident, and despite the fact that Hellspawn is no longer able to siphon the power of the orb, it doesn't mean that he's not a powerful being on his own, as he unleashes a blast of energy directly into Warblade's chest, knocking him back off of his feet. Hellspawn, once again believing that he's won the day, begins to mock Warblade and states that all he needs to do is activate the backup system and that the Stargate will remain open and allow the Demonites to invade. However, Marlowe then takes this opportunity to inform Hellspawn that he's already removed the quote-unquote $2 processor that was enabling the backup system to operate, which means that the Stargate should be closing at this very moment. Realizing that Marlowe is correct, Hellspawn is enraged as he decides that even though the Demonites can no longer invade, he's going to reclaim the orb and use its power to kill the WildC.A.T.S team, as he blasts a hole through the wall and makes his way towards the inner part of the facility to reclaim the orb. Marlowe realizes that this isn't good, as Void states they need to get to the orb before he does. So Void takes the WildC.A.T.S team and teleports them down into the facility to get to the orb before Hellspawn, as Shaft tells them that they're going to take care of the rest of the flunkies that were working with Hellspawn and try and arrest them while they deal with Hellspawn directly. As they reach the room, Hellspawn is once again furious that he has to deal with the WildC.A.T.S team, and as he turns around, he makes his way to where the orb was stashed so he can use its power to deal with them. However, he is furious to find that the orb is already gone and he does not know who took it. We then see an advertisement for Stormwatch. If you'd like to know more about Stormwatch, please feel free to check out my Stormwatch playlist. They're then interrupted as they all turn around to find that the gnome has in fact claimed the orb for himself. This is kind of a weird double cross, as gnome, up until this point, hasn't really played a huge role in the book, and it's not really completely obvious why he was so intent on betraying Marlowe, other than the fact that he just wanted to gain the power of the orb for himself, but maybe that's all it was. He also has a Coda assassin. Keep in mind, like, everybody has a Coda assassin on their team, and, you know, it was kind of implied that they're not high in numbers in terms of, you know, their availability, but it sure seems like everybody's able to get a Coda assassin to work for him. He's also joined by his triad, which is made up of Attica and Harm and also Slag. Zealot tries to figure out what's happening and wonders why Gnome has betrayed them. He states that it was simply because he wanted to gain the power of the orb for himself to use it to take over the world, as he unleashes the power of the orb onto Hellspawn, who, of course, despite being very powerful, isn't powerful enough to withstand a blast of energy directly from the orb. As we then see Hellspawn laid out on the ground, Gnome takes the opportunity to tell the rest of the WildC.A.T.S in attendance that they will all be met with the same fate if they choose to oppose him, as his flunkies all start to engage in battle with the WildC.A.T.S team, and Gnome believes that he has the upper hand. We then see an advertisement for Cyberforce number 3 of the original miniseries, guest starring Pitt. If you'd like to know more about both Pitt and Cyberforce, you can check out my playlists on both Pitt and Cyberforce. As the battle begins to heat up, Gnome decides to take this opportunity to flee and get himself out of harm's way. However, he is cut off by Void when she appears in front of him and states that he needs to surrender the orb as it is becoming unstable. Once again, we don't know exactly what that means, if it means it's going to explode or destroy the planet or what, because there's so much mystery around the orb. However, the gnome decides that he is not going to oblige Void's request and instead states that he knows her secret, that she and the orb are actually one. He then uses the orb to launch his own attack against Void, hitting her with a beam of energy. She continues to beg him to stop, stating that it's becoming more unstable because of this, and that if he doesn't stop now, it's going to be too late. He continues his assault. However, he is approached from behind by Marlowe, who is holding him at gunpoint, and states that if he doesn't stop now, that Marlowe's going to ice him. The gnome decides to call Marlowe's bluff and states that they have a bargain, and that he's going to call in his favor right now, and that heroes have to keep their word. We see then that Void pleads with Marlowe to help her as she's still being attacked with an energy blast from the orb, and Marlowe obliges by blasting the gnome's arm clean off at the elbow. This, of course, is something that shocks Gnome as he can't believe what he's seen, and he's also dealing with the pain of having his arm severed as we see it fall off of the platform they're on down into a long cavern. He decides to jump in after it as he doesn't want to lose the orb. Marlowe states, "I never said I was a hero." As Void is down, hurting, trying to regain her composure, Marlowe runs to her side to see if she's okay. She states that, the orb has triggered a explosion in the base of the reactor and that the whole place is going to blow as we see the big explosion behind them, and that they only have about 5 minutes now to get out of the facility. Marlowe states that they can't all make it on foot and that Void needs to teleport them out. However, she states that she's too weak from Gnome's attack to do that, and she wants Marlowe to save himself. As the countdown is broadcast over the loudspeakers of the facility, we see that the Youngblood team decides that they have to retreat and get Vice President Quayle out of harm's way. Also, the Triad in the employment of the Gnome decide that they need to get away as Attica tells Slag to grab what's left of Harm so that they can retreat. And also, we see Pike and the Coda Assassin decide that they're not going to die in this facility either, as they figure it's best that they get out now while they still have the opportunity. As the Youngblood team is running for the exit, we see Combat ask Shaft if he thinks that there's anything they can do to help the Wildcats team. However, Shaft says that from what he's seen, they're more than capable of handling themselves, and at this point, they're kind of on their own. We then see Marlowe and Void still in the large cavern as a huge beam of energy is starting to erupt as we see the countdown get down to 30 seconds. Void pleading with Marlowe to get the others from the Wildcats team to safety so that they don't all die here. But Marlowe refuses to leave and, abandon his friend and states there has to be another way. But Void states that she doesn't have the energy. Marlowe states if that's all she needs, then she should take his hand, as he believes that if he is indeed who Void has always told him he is, that he should have the ability to re-energize her so that she can teleport them all out. She states that she will try, but Marlowe tells her not to try, to just do it. As we see outside of the facility, the Youngblood team looks back to watch the whole thing explode in a huge fireball as they look on, wondering if the Wildcats did in fact make it out unscathed. The next morning, we see the smoking pile of rubble that used to be the facility as Shaft and Bedrock wander through. Bedrock asks Shaft if any of the Demonites made it through the Stargate. Shaft tells him that none of them made it through in one piece, and what was left of them all burned up in the Earth's atmosphere. Shaft then asks Bedrock how the cleanup is going, and Bedrock states that they haven't found any survivors, though they did find what was left of Spartan. As we see Shaft move some of the rubble away, he realizes that the only reason that any of Youngblood and the other Wildcats survived was because of Spartan's sacrifice, as he tells Bedrock that, Spartan was the one who was able to prevent the Demonite Armada from getting through the Stargate, and also was the one who gave them all the time to distract Hellspawn so that, they could get control of the orb and, basically win the battle. As Bedrock asks if he thinks any of the other Wildcats made it out alive, Shaft states that he seems to believe that they're going to encounter these Wildcats once again in the future, as from what he saw, they're a resourceful bunch, and he believes that they're more than capable of holding their own, and that they are indeed alive. We then see image info. Once again, nothing special about image info. It is what it is. It's literally just blurbs about upcoming image books, and we've seen this dozens of times at this point in all of the videos that I produce for this channel. Meanwhile, miles away, the Wildcats team is celebrating on their assault craft, cracking open a bottle of champagne, happy that they've been able to defeat Hellspawn and stop the Demonite invasion, and also prevent the orb from falling into the wrong hands. And everyone's quite jovial except for Voodoo, who is very sad because she believes that Spartan is dead. Zealot wonders if there's anything that they can do, but Voodoo's really more upset about the fact that no one else seems quite as sad as her. But Marlowe states that he's got a surprise for her, as he says that Voodoo should have a little bit more faith in his abilities. As he leads her down the hallway, he brings her to a room that contains another Spartan, and Marlowe explains that Spartan's consciousness can be downloaded into these new synthetic cyborg bodies anytime he's destroyed, so it's technically impossible for Spartan to die. Voodoo's really shocked by this, but also very happy. We then see Marlowe later on talking to Void as he asks her what seems to be the trouble and that she doesn't seem to be her normal self. Void states that it's because she now no longer knows what the future holds. And that's because, as we find out here, the image we saw of Voodoo being destroyed in the first issue of Wildcats was actually an event that took place in a future that now hasn't happened technically. So when she was destroyed, part of her was sent back in time to rejoin to her past self. And in the future we saw her destroyed in, she never teamed up with Marlowe or the Wildcats, and that's why she was ultimately defeated. So because of that future part of herself coming back into the past, she then changed the way that she operated, employed Marlowe to aid her, and then also formed up the Wildcats so that they could defeat Hellspawn and the Gnome. And now she's just kind of lost, as she doesn't really know what to expect going forward. But Marlowe states that's just part of being human, and that she's going to have to get used to it. And yeah, that plot point is a little bit convoluted, but in all honesty, from what we've seen in previous issues and what they were doing with those plot points, it's not out of place. And honestly, it's a little bit easier to understand than some of the story points we've seen up until this issue. Then in the epilogue, we see a paperboy yelling, extra, extra, read all about it. Dan Quayle is an alien. As we see a man wearing a trench coat approach the boy, he states that he'll take a copy of that, as he reads in the paper that, in fact, Dan Quayle was possessed by an alien. We then see that the man in question was actually Lynch, and he states, Marlowe, you're right. Had you told me what was really happening, I would have locked you up, as he walks away and the boy continues to try and sell his papers. And at this point, I think is when Lynch starts to realize that not everything is exactly what he thought it was. We then see what is the beginning advertisement for a special preview of Tribe. I think I have at least issue number 1 of Tribe, but I don't know how many issues of Tribe actually got printed. I'm going to have to do a little research to see how long this comic lasted, because it wasn't very long, and there is a possibility that they only ever printed the 1 issue. But then again, that's only speculation. I got to do a little bit of research. But here's the special preview of it. The preview starts out in the office of one Guido Duval, who is apparently the head of the New York sports racketeering and betting mob operations, apparently. And he is sitting working at his desk when he is approached by a man named Victor von Grock, who tells him that he is taking over this business and that Guido now works for him. Guido then states, how did you get in here? And calls for Carl and Ralph, apparently his security officers, and tells von Grock that he's got about 5 seconds to leave. Von Grock, however, states that's no way to talk to his new boss, and that also the 2 men in question, Carl and Ralph, were actually rather rude to him as he entered, and states that, Guido should have been hiring better security. Guido then states, do you know who I am? And von Grock tells his associate, who is apparently some sort of a robot or cyborg guy, that Guido no longer remembers his own name, and that he also needs him to shut Carl up, as he's making it too hard to think with all of the noise he's making, as we see the robot and or cyborg snap Carl's neck, killing him instantly, dropping him in a pool of his own blood. He then states that he expects Guido to, have a business meeting with him for scheduled, let's say, noon the next day. And Guido says, you must think I'm out of my mind. And Von Grock says, "You know what? I think you are, and I'm happy to oblige," as he unleashes some sort of energy blast from his eyeballs directly into Guido's face, apparently killing him. He then turns around and has his associate leave with him out the front of the office door, stating that now that they're the ones who control these operations, that they should go take in a boxing match this evening, but they need to get there early because apparently the kid they're going to watch finishes fast. Meanwhile, on Manhattan's west side, we are teleported to the outside of the Hype Club, which is a new New York nightclub that is only open on the weekends and is in a different undisclosed location every single weekend. And the owner of this club is promising that there's going to be all sorts of paparazzi celebrities there, and it's basically to create buzz, make this the place that, to be seen, and the place that you want to see people, and the place you want to go. And it's actually working quite a bit, as there's about 1,000 people lined up to try and get into this nightclub. One of them being this invisible fellow who makes his way through the crowd, sneaking past everyone and opening the door, going right in. Of course, the men working inside of the building trying to get the club ready for this evening's affairs don't see the invisible figure. They just think a door blew open. As they continue with their work, one of them seems to think he might have seen something in a mirror, but believes that it's just his mind playing tricks on him, as he calls to another man sitting at a desk and tells him that it's time for him to get the place ready. This man is looking at a picture of a very beautiful nightclub, unlike the unfinished warehouse that they're set up in right now. But that man goes around and starts to, apparently through some sort of magical or superpowers, turn the warehouse into the club that he was just looking at in the picture. And this whole thing is being narrated by the invisible fellow. Now, if all of this seems confusing and you don't know who any of these characters are, guess what? Join the club, because I don't know what the hell any of this is about myself. I've never read Tribe before now, and hopefully it explains some of this, because this little preview thing is just creating multitudes of questions and giving zero answers. We then see Call of the Wild, the letter section of Wildcats. None of these letters are particularly interesting. It's really just people saying about how much they love Wildcats and how great they think, Jim Lee's artwork is, and how happy they are that he was able to leave Marvel and start this venture. It's just standard, you're the greatest fan mail type of thing. And on the reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement for Cybernary, which the first several issues were printed in conjunction with the first several issues of Deathblow. If you'd like to know more about Cybernary, check out my Deathblow playlist. And unfortunately, right as the first issue of Cybernary was going to print was when the creator of Cybernary, Nick Manabat, was dying of cancer. And I believe he died right around the time the first issue came out. So there's only like 3 or 4 issues of Cybernary. It never goes any further than that, which is unfortunate because it's a really unique idea. And I really liked Cybernary for how different it was from all the other Image titles. And I would have loved to have seen where he took that story had he lived. And it's also just tragic that a man who was, I think, only like 25 died so young of, a disease like that. It really stinks for him and his family, and for us for not being able to get more of, his artwork and his creation. It was an all around terrible tragedy, and it sucks that, that had to happen to him and for everyone involved. And that was Wildcats number 4 of the original miniseries. Overall, I think it's probably the best issue of that original miniseries, which admittedly I don't think is saying all that much. I'm not a huge fan of the original Wildcats miniseries. I believe a lot of the story points seemed rushed and don't necessarily make sense. A lot of it's convoluted. The whole time travel aspect with Void seems really tacked on, as it's dwelled upon so minimally, but it's like basically the linchpin of the entire story, that she was able to send a piece of herself back in time so that they could defeat Hellspawn and prevent the Demonite invasion, and also prevent herself from being killed by Gnome. And also, like, the fact that Gnome played such a major role in, the idea of her going back in time is really weird, given that his character was not featured a whole lot in the book. And again, there's just, I feel like Wildcats is one of those stories that, like, they tried to rush so much of it for that initial miniseries when it should have been drawn out a little more. I don't even think this should have started with a miniseries, or if it had, just kind of like start with the idea of, you know, Void finding Marlowe and the two of them starting up the Wildcats team. And then after that part, then get into the whole idea of Gnome and Hellspawn and all that. But apparently that's not the way they wanted to do things. And in my opinion, the story kind of suffered as a result. But once again, those are just my opinions. Your opinion may be that you thought the Wildcats miniseries was awesome. And if that's the case, it's fine, because everybody's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.